Hey everybody, good morning. It is Spiritual Healthcare Day 41. 41, that's nuts. It's like, it blew my mind yesterday with day 40. It seems, I don't know, it just seems like we started this yesterday. It's so weird. But anyway, welcome everyone. It is good to see you all. And I am really interested to get going in our subjects today because I had a great question come in from Produce and Inspire on Twitter, so we're going to get to that in a little bit. I have been reading a really cool book. Good morning, Arnold. Good morning, Patricia. Good morning, everybody. Hello. Hello. It's nice to see you. I hope you guys are having a good day. The weather here is rather rainy, but it's hot. It's hot and it's humid and it's kind of rainy. Good morning, Wes. Nice to see you. It is good to see you guys. This is awesome. Hope you guys, as I say, had a really awesome evening yesterday. We had a pretty good day here. Good morning, Jan. How are you? It is so good to see everyone, and I want to delve into some pretty cool stuff today about hauntings and Canadian history, as well as the power of joy involved in all of that, because there is such a massive influence with that within the paranormal and within Canada's history with the paranormal also. So I'm stoked to get involved in that. Of course, my great-great-grandfather was the founder of the first paranormal association in Canada. That's always played a crucial role, but Canadian history kind of gets forgotten in the paranormal. So good morning, Jay and Nigel and Marge. It's nice to see you guys. Nice to see everybody. Hope you guys are having an awesome day. I don't know what the weather is like where you are, but it is pretty nice here. As I say, it's like it's kind of rainy, but it's warm, so all the windows are open, which is great. You get that like really nice fresh rain smell, which is awesome. Good morning, Greg. Nice to see you. It's just so awesome to see everybody, coming in the morning and logging in. It's so cool. It is going to be an interesting morning. It's so funny because we've got, there's so many people that end up, writing in questions and things like that. And, oftentimes we get asked a lot about paranormal history in Canada because it's really not talked about very much, which is so funny. It's one of those things where it kind of gets brushed over. Like we hear a lot about the SPR in the UK. We hear a lot about studies in Europe and the United States and like Princeton and all of these different places. They've got some of the best parapsychology labs in the world. Princeton and Northampton and all these amazing universities. And Canada gets kind of passed over, except we've made some pretty cool discoveries, and our history is phenomenal. Good morning, Kathy. Good morning, Michael. It is good to see everybody. Everyone's logging in. I love this. I love it. I just love it. But yeah, and you guys are 102 today, Jan. Oh my God. You guys are going to be 102. It's not 102 here yet. It will be probably later in the summer. Give it a couple of months here and we're going to be sitting in the same boat. So right now we are kind of just in this like transition rainy spring period that's going on right now, which is usual for Alberta. I'm just glad we don't have snow anymore. The snow is officially gone, and I am just happy about that because usually it doesn't go away till much later in the much later the year. So it's good. We're above average right now, which is so good. Makes it a little easier to open the windows and stuff like that. So it's really, really, really cool. Marge is saying she baked a lemon cake. Oh, I love lemon cakes. Oh my God. I would ask for some, but the screen is in the way. Good morning, Des. Nice to see you. It's always so good to know that we have such a great morning ahead of us. It's just so cool to be able to do this and connect every morning with what everybody's doing and all of that. It's just fantastic. So Canadian history is really interesting because a lot of what we think of as Canadian history really has been buried. And a lot of it is just being uncovered in the last little while with things like the reconciliation movements and things just coming to light and people just finding their voice. The one thing about the last number of years is people, especially the First Nations communities and things like that, are really beginning to find their voice when it comes to issues that should have been covered years and years and years ago that have just been ignored and swept under the rug. And in Alberta, we've got such a strong First Nations background here. And the history is quite phenomenal. There was an entire culture that was nearly erased here, the Papas Chase, and amazing group of people. They were the first settlers here, really, the First Nation settlers, and they were just thriving in Alberta. And then the Europeans came in and kind of wrecked it. They killed all the food supplies and whatnot because the First Nations people wouldn't move off the land so that the Europeans could develop. So they basically decided they were going to starve these poor people off their land. And there was quite a civil war here in Edmonton and Alberta and into Saskatchewan, where there was a lot of feuding and whatnot, and it did not end well. So there's burial grounds and burial like monuments that are just kind of sitting all over Alberta and whatnot. So we've got this really long history of a lot of turmoil, a lot of strife, and it's led to some very interesting haunted places as well. A lot of history that was kind of squished under the rug. And the damn thing was that when we've got a very old hospital here called the Charles Camsell, and the Charles Camsell has become kind of this notorious haunted location here in Alberta, and the history behind it was really quite horrifying. They were bringing people from up north during a alleged tuberculosis outbreak, and the tuberculosis outbreak kind of came under suspicious circumstances. It was very odd, but nevertheless there was one. There was this TB outbreak, and what they did was they shipped doctors up north in these groups called X-ray tours. And what they were doing was that they wanted to go up and they wanted to identify the people that had TB and then bring them back to Edmonton and put them back into the Charles Camsell Hospital. And but the damn thing was, at this point in time in history, there was no vaccines for this. There was nothing. Like if you got TB, that was pretty much it. Like the odds of you recovering were very low. And people were in the hospital for 10 years, like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years. It was crazy. And what they discovered later on, and what was so horrifying, was the fact that the bodies, once these people passed away, were not being sent back up north. And when the families were asking, like, where the hell are all our loved ones, what they discovered was the fact that they were just being buried with like in the grounds and whatnot, in these unmarked graves. It was really horrific. And there was, that coupled with the residential schools, and the 60s scoop. For those of you guys who don't know what residential schools are, it was basically these schools where they would take people's children and force them into, it was like these little prisons, basically. It was pretty terrible. And they would basically take people's children and force them to not learn their culture, learn this brand new culture, and they were tortured. It was terrible. It was awful. And the damn thing was, people think that the residential schools were something that closed in the early 1900s or something like that, but the last residential school actually closed around 1996. Like it was very recent. I could have that date wrong, by the way, but it was recent. Like it was very, very close to that. So this was not something that was in our past history. This was something that was happening. You guys were alive when the residential schools were were functioning. So anyway, it's led to this very, very tumultuous history within Alberta, and led to, allegedly very haunted locations like the Charles Camsell Hospital. It's been talked about in investigations and things like that for ages, because it's been so active, and it's been this place of kind of emotional upheaval. So we've got all of this like deep rooted Canadian history when it comes to emotional imbalance and upset and things like that, which of course ends up often leading to some pretty bizarre paranormal activity. But the one thing I really wanted to touch on was the fact that our as the Society of Psychical Research was developed, my great-great-grandfather, as I say, founded the first paranormal association in Canada, in Ontario in the late 1800s, early 1900s. His name was Albert Durant Watson. And he worked with a channel by the name of Louis Benjamin. And his whole point, his whole mission, what he wanted to do, because he was a very noted physician in Ontario, he's very famous, and his house is considered a historical location now. But what he wanted to do was get across the point, like during this crazy time in history, that the key to understanding a lot of paranormal research, getting in touch with non-physical and all of those things, was really finding those pieces of joy. So when he ended up basically being the scribe for Louis Benjamin, and receiving all these messages from a group of spirits that he called the humble ones, or they called themselves the humble ones, he would turn around and write this down, and wanted to put it out there, because he was saying it's not about upset, it's not about fear, it's not about all of those things. It really is about connecting with joy. When we can do that, we start to connect with everything else. So his perspective was very different, especially during an era where we had all of this like really heavy historical and emotional stuff going on. It was not fun. It was not a good time. You know, people were in such a mess. And as the research began to evolve, of course, he started to become very much under heat for this, because he was as a very prominent physician in Ontario. And at that time period, physicians just didn't believe in this stuff. It was like, if you believed in this, you were off your nut. That was it. You just, you were off your nut. You had some major players that were coming in, of course, looking at the facts and looking to understand this stuff. Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud and people like that, who were all very interested in psychical research and whatnot. And of course, the development of the SPR in the late 1800s. But what was interesting was one of the most interesting pieces was a development that happened in the 70s here in Canada, in Ontario, by the Toronto Psychical Research Association or like research group. And they were made up of not only the SPR, but also people from Mensa. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to begin to understand how these hauntings, how these thought forms, all of this were basically, how are they being created? What is going on when we're talking to non-physical? So they wanted to be able to build all this up, to try to figure out what it was that was the key factor in experiencing this phenomenon in a really positive way. And what they ended up doing was creating something called the Philip experiment. And what they did was they started to research and bring in all of these different people, all of these different, from all over the place, sit them down, look at the seances from the Victorian era, and start to recreate what was done back then. Now, this is something that's really neat. So once they started to recreate this stuff, which is, they went on for, I guess it was about a year. They went on and on about this. And whatnot, no results, nothing was happening, everything was just, whatever. And they would get together and they would meditate and they would think on it, and they would, they would do all of those things that they thought were conducive to enhancing these experiences. And when nothing was working, and I say it was about a year later, nothing was working, and they decided that they were going to take another look at it before they quit. And when they did, something really interesting caught them. They realized that the groups that were hanging around and doing these seances and creating these amazing events, the one factor that they didn't add was joy. They were reading about people having fun and joking and having a blast and laughing with each other and creating this really great environment. And lo and behold, stuff would happen. So the Philip experiment, before I get into the results of this, was really interesting because they didn't want to just talk to something non-physical. They just didn't want to, create, things with communication with a Ouija board or something like that. What they wanted to do was to be able to manifest consciousness on their own, something completely different. What they wanted to do was write a backstory, and they did, about a guy named Philip. Completely made up character. just theatrical character, created his story. He had a scandal. There was a love story behind it. There was murder. There was all sorts of stuff. So they created this cool story anyway. And they talked about Philip day in and day out, like he was a guy, like he was somebody they could go research. And they got to the point where they were in such belief about Philip that it felt real to them. It just felt real. So what they did was, at that point, they started to use these seance techniques to start to talk to Philip. And as they did, and as they added joy to the mix, guess what happened? All of a sudden, some intelligence called Philip started to respond to them. So it would talk to them, it would interact with them, they would hear rappings on tables, they would see the movement of objects, all the poltergeist and PK stuff that you and I would consider paranormal activity. This was happening for them over a character that they completely created. They would come in the morning and sit down and, hey, Philip, and they would hear knockings in front of them and responding to the person who just asked a question or said good morning. They would have all sorts of crazy things happen, and they got to know this new character, Philip, very well. So it began a very interesting story because they started to realize that not only were they able to elicit these responses, but their focus, their attention added in with this little bit of joy actually was creating something that was thinking on its own. It was intelligent. It was, responding, all sorts of stuff. So in order to replicate the experiment, because they felt that it wasn't going to hold any weight unless they were able to replicate it, what they ended up doing was getting another group together and had them go through the same thing. So what they would do is they would go to a different location. Was the same process. They created another character, another character named Lilith. And they wrote her backstory. She was a spy and she had this exciting life and all this was going on. So what they did was they sat down and did the same thing, and again added in this idea that joy was fueling this activity, and bam, lo and behold, they were communicating with Lilith, and it was just the most fascinating thing. So here we have this great turning point in Canadian and paranormal history that's really it's really world changing when it comes to these points of view, because up until then, it was really assumed that this was either a survival after death question, or it was it was all in people's heads or something like that. And this really went to show that our thoughts, our ability to focus, our emotions, everything makes a difference in not only how we're receiving paranormal phenomena, but also that level of connection with all of that is non-physical. So it was a really unprecedented experiment that was just so glossed over by the general population. And now, of course, we've got people that are bringing this more and more to the forefront, and people are beginning to realize exactly what is going on behind the scenes, and that it's not only about life after death. It's about how we are living, and that connection just doesn't go away. It's something that we have this divine ability to interact with, and it's just the coolest thing. So as Canada has kind of grown in where it is, we've now got these amazing researchers. One being a favorite of mine is Dr. Morris Friedman, who is out of the University of Ontario. He works, or University of Toronto, sorry. He works at the hospital there. He's one of the chief neurologists. And he has been working on, and his paper is available now, this amazing study on brain damage, Alzheimer's, and psi experiences. And what he's discovered is so cool, because he's started to realize that the brain acts like a camera. So when we take a photograph, when we think about a camera, a camera, in order to take pictures, it actually has filters in it. We don't think about those, but they actually block out things like infrared, UV, all the spectrums that we don't want in our pictures, basically. So these cameras have these filters. And so we get this nice, beautiful, clear picture that we can translate with our eyes and understand. And what he's discovered is that our brains work in a very similar way. So that when there is a brain injury or a filter in place, or, or there's something's disrupted or broken, like, a plaque in the brain, or, anything like that, what he's discovered is that sometimes that brain injury might actually be deconstructing or damaging those filters, allowing us to see even more than what we normally would. So his paper has now been published, it's out, and he's still working on this research. Is really a phenomenal idea. And the more that's coming out with this, the more we start to understand about how we're working in terms of emotionally, how our brain is translating the consciousness that we're receiving, all of these different things, and leading to a bigger concept that our bodies and our minds and all of that really do act as fundamental or as translators of a fundamental consciousness rather than an emergent one. So it's interesting to see where this stuff is going. But Canada is it's pushing forward. It's fueling all of this stuff. I've had some amazing cases here, amazing cases. One that really stood out for me, which was one of my favorites, and I always include it on some of my walking classrooms that I do, is a place called, it's called MKT. It's a market now. But at the time that it was still my client, it was the Iron Horse. And it was a bar down on an old strip, sort of a party strip here in Edmonton called White Avenue. And it was the neatest place because it was the first train station in Edmonton that was established. It's in this little area called Strathcona, and Strathcona didn't used to be a part of Edmonton. It used to be a separate city. So this train station was the first one to really get established there. And now it's restaurant and bar and all sorts of things like that. But it was so interesting because the staff, when it was the Iron Horse, was reporting all sorts of things, like people being the feelings of being watched. They were seeing apparitions sort of manifest on the upper level. They were seeing all of this bizarre things, and it was just the neatest. It was really cool. So anyway, when they called us in, the owner had said something really, really strange was happening because he was getting these older gentlemen that were knocking on the main door, usually around midnight, and they often had their grandkids. And he, would open the door and they would ask if they could come in, and he would say no, because it's a bar. You can't bring your kids into a bar. So finally, after a number of these encounters, he finally asked, he was like, what is it? Like, why are you guys here? Because none of them knew each other. And finally he got an answer, and they said, well, we really wanted to introduce our kids to the spirit that we knew when we worked here. They were all engineers. They were all trained engineers. And he was really shocked. And he said, well, like, what are you talking about? And they began to describe this amazing relationship they had with this spirit of this little girl who manifested on the top of the staircase most nights. And they had this fantastic, fun relationship. And they didn't know who she was. They didn't know why she was there. But she loved to see them. They loved to see her. And they wanted to be able to pass this on to their children. So when myself and Stephanie and some of my crew went in, we'd set up our cameras and whatever, and we were upstairs and just chatting and having some fun. We weren't there long, and we began to hear giggling, and we would hear this giggling. And at first we thought it had to be coming through some sort of speakers. It had to be coming through somewhere. And once we ruled all that out and we realized that it was real, we would go up to the giggling and we'd hear footsteps run from where the giggling was to the other side of the upper floor, which was all open concept. And so we would follow it and whatnot, and we'd get there, and then all of a sudden we'd hear the giggling again, and we'd follow it somewhere else. And we had this fantastic interaction. We never saw her. We never saw her. But we had this fantastic interaction, and it was just phenomenal. And this train station, as I say, was built in 1910. No, sorry, it was 1907. It was finished in 1908. And it was just the neatest thing to experience. We had a blast at this place. And it's little interactions and things like that that make these locations memorable. So even though we've got this, really tumultuous history, throughout Canada, there's these highlights, of these joyous experiences that I think we really need to be able to focus on. And I think that's where some of the healing is, in some of these cases and some of these experiences. Sometimes people will experience something like that and it terrifies the hell out of them. But again, it's the story, that you're telling yourself sometimes about what's going on, when it comes to some of this activity. So Canadian history, as I say, it's very interesting, especially in regards to the paranormal, and the locations have been a blast to investigate. Our river valley has had some incredible things go on just here in Alberta. Of course, the river valley, it served quite often as burial ground and things like that, for the First Nations people here, because they experienced some just horrific things. But even before that, a lot of our land here in Alberta used to be volcanic land. So what happens when we get volcanic land, that's been there for a really long time, and there's been a lot of pressure underneath the ground, sometimes what will happen is there'll be like a quartz bed that will actually form. And when we put pressure and things like that on quartz, and energy really starts to get transferred. Quartz does not create its own energy. It has its own thing going on, but you've got the ability to use it to transfer energy. So for example, your watch, right? That's why people can, shake their watch and things like that, but you can transfer energy with quartz. It's a really great conductor, and it often will have these weird electromagnetic fields, like really, really weird. Up and down, it'll waver all over the place. And so our river valley has a lot of these weird electromagnetics that just, all over the place, up and down. And it's really intriguing to go down there. We've experienced these sort of shadow people down there. We've experienced these bizarre lights that show up and are zip around and take off. At first we thought it was plasma, because quartz can actually create plasma when it's under the right conditions. We thought it was plasma. It turns out it's not. And so we've had some really interesting things go on. So all of these areas, in Canada get really, forgotten about or neglected, and we don't think about it. And I think a lot of the time, again, it falls into the same category as our history, because our history is, it's been washed under the rug too. It's been swept under. And a lot of people are finding their voice in regards to the Charles Camsell right now. There's been a lot of controversy about what to do with that land. It's now being turned into condos, and there's been this big uproar about that, and how they're going to turn this property into a place where healing can happen. And I think that's really such a key point throughout all of this, is how can we make healing happen when we've had this level of trauma and upset. And the States is the same way. The First Nations in the U.S. have faced the same challenges. Been reading a book recently about the biography of Walt Whitman, who of course was so passionate about the idea that our emotions and our thoughts transform our world. And he was such a passionate leader on First Nations people and wanting them to have their rights back. Of course, he was gay and felt really strongly about human rights in general. And it's been a really interesting inspiration to be reading about Walt Whitman right now. He's really cool. So the reading that I wanted to do today is based on our theme, is from A.D. Watson's first book, The 20th Plane. And he, as I say, he wrote this with the idea that he wanted to put out a different message into the world about paranormal phenomena. It's a phenomenal book, and it's so much of it is just transcriptions of people and whatnot that Louis Benjamin had channeled when he was talking about him. And I think he really, really, really had a great message about that and about what non-physical had in mind, when it starts to come through in sessions, like, for example, whether it be A.D. Watson or the Philip experiment or anything else. So this is what he had to say. For over 50 years, I've regarded the names of Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Emerson, Lincoln, Whitman, and others who are concerned in this research with a reverence for which I can find no adequate expression. These men have always been to me like stars in my heaven, unapproachable, serene, and undying. Imagine then the surprise with which I must naturally receive the story that any and much more, that all of these have spoken to me, in either for my own sake or for the sake of a great purpose, since either motive seems to exalt me unduly. Nevertheless, as I try to imagine myself in their places, I can conceive that I should not be swayed by any sense of superiority over simple and sincere souls. Indeed, the very title they choose to assume, the humble ones, is evidence that they do not regard themselves as better or more select than the unlettered, unrenowned, who have not attained to eminence in any field of achievement. What they require for their purpose is a certain vibration, which for some reason pertains to the group that meets in this home. It proves no superiority or aristocracy or intellect or heart further than the power to be passive, serene, humble, and sincere, to have a faith that is based on the vision of spiritual values, a courage born of such a faith, and a spirit glad and free because of a love which does not alter when it alteration finds. Essentially, there is no one greater than anybody else, and as Socrates pointed out long ago, the wise owe to the ignorant knowledge. What more is to be expected, therefore, than that these starry immortals should wish to instruct me and all of us who need wisdom? That they do this does not prove that we are greater than others, but rather that we have realized our poverty in those things which these immortals have to bestow, and by that realization have become fitting instruments through which great and valued revelations may be mediated to others. Love it. Love it. Albert Durant Watson. He's so good. And the damn thing is we see this over and over again, and people are always, they're worried that they're going to get warnings or, these upsetting messages and things like that. And it's really not what they're about. So yeah, Canadian history and the paranormal is so good. It's so good. It's so good. There's so much here. So that being said, I wanted to give you guys a really cool process today. And this actually came through a conversation I had this morning, and I love this. We oftentimes, I think we go through our world and we go through our day, and when we look around our home, we don't really see the people really that have influenced us. We really haven't. We hear these little quotes and quips and things like that, and then we just put them aside. But a little while ago, I was encouraging everybody to make a sanctuary space in their home, is to be able to clear a space where you can come, do your journaling work, maybe watch spiritual healthcare, and create that sanctuary space that doesn't get disrupted, where you can just find peace. But what I wanted to add to that, and what we decided we wanted to add to this morning, was to be able to go online, find pictures, find those like memorable faces that have made a difference for you. And it could be anybody. It could be someone like Socrates. It could be someone like Plato, or it could be someone that you know in your life right now. It could be a musician. It could be, who knows? There's so many for different people. But print up their photo, or have it printed and sent, or, do whatever you want with that, and put them up. Put them up on your wall, so that when, you're looking around, you're filling your space with that energy. And it's powerful. It's so powerful. So I wanted to be able to pass that on today. So that, if you feel inclined to do that, you feel inclined to put a spin on our experiences in our house and things like that, and our houses, make it a sanctuary. Figure out how you want to do that. Make it look the way you want, so that when your eyes are meeting things, they're meeting something that's inspiring and is going to make you feel good. It's a great idea. Marge says she's actually done that. That's awesome. It's just great. I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's a way of, as I say, being able to really reorient even the subconscious about what it is that we're looking at, and the input that we're telling ourselves. Because right now we've got on the TV, we've got, of course, all the information about the pandemic. There's a lot of turmoil going on. I know, like, the US is in a mess right now. We've got a lot, there's a lot going on right now that's not very positive. So the more that we can start to reorient our space and our focus, the quicker that we can heal as a people and a society. So let's make a point and do that. Also, things like your desktop wallpaper. What's your desktop wallpaper? Is it something that you want to look at, or is it something you just, threw up there because whatever? Oftentimes Steve Harvey is actually a great example of this. What he has done is he actually created a vision board for his desktop. And he's got all of the things and people that he, wants to, either deal with, or the goals that he wants to accomplish. So every time he turns on his computer or his phone, he sees it every single time. So it's a really, really good idea. Really great. I loved this idea this morning, so I had to pass it on to you guys. So that being said, the to-do that I wanted to give you guys today is so much fun. This is so cool. So I found, Des says all his wallpapers are his dog. Yeah, a lot of mine are Galen as well. Yeah, I've got, it's like, yeah, but again, right? It's like, what are you looking at? What is in your vicinity? I've got pictures up, all over the place of all the people that I love, and all sorts of things. So yeah, figure out what it is for you. It's going to be different for everybody. So the to-do that I have for you guys is so cool. I don't know how many of you guys, either as kids or as adults reading to your kids, remember the book Where the Wild Things Are. And it was such a cool story. Talk about creating your world, right? Talk about manifesting in your world. Where the Wild Things Are was such an iconic book. And what's so neat is that Christopher Walken, has decided to read this aloud to everybody. And it's now on YouTube. And I think it's just the neatest thing, because of course everybody knows Christopher Walken's iconic voice. It's such a neat combination. So I'm going to post this link for you guys, so you guys can either share it with your kids or listen to it yourselves. It's something that's so different and so neat. So I'm going to post that for all of you. He's in this like mode right now of reading books. And he's done a whole bunch of them, but I thought it was the coolest thing that he did Where the Wild Things Are, because it's such a unique book about realizing so many realizations, but also being able to immerse yourself in a world and manifest and create it. So it's really good. So anyway, I wanted to pass that on to you guys today, and I will post it later on Entity Seeker so you guys can find it. Also, for those of you guys who are new, I know there's a few new people I noticed pop up. There is a collection of old past classes of spiritual healthcare on YouTube, youtube.com. So youtube.com/Entity Seeker is all the past classes of spiritual healthcare, as well as entityseeker.ca. And also on entityseeker.ca, on the same page, the media and video page, there's a brand new interview from me on the Mysteries and Monsters podcast, which was a blast. It was a UK podcast, with Paul Bestel, and I had a blast being on it. So it's a good hour of talking about some cool paranormal stuff, some stuff in my history. We talk about teaching the living, and all sorts of things. So the Mysteries and Monsters podcast, guys, and as I say, the link is on entityseeker.ca in the media video section with all the spiritual healthcare classes. They're all there. So it was a really, really fun interview. So Paul's a great guy. Okay, so everybody, our health affirmations, because we got to go into a day with positive vibration. Everybody take a breath. It is natural for my body to be well. Even if I don't know what to do in order to get better, my body does. I have trillions of cells with individual consciousness, and they know how to achieve individual balance. When this condition began, I didn't know what I know now. I don't need to understand the cause of this illness. I only have to gently, eventually release this illness. It doesn't matter how it got started, because it's reversing its course right now. And there's no hurry about any of this. My body knows what to do. Well-being is natural to me, and my inner being is intricately aware of my physical body. My cells are asking for what they need to thrive, and Source is answering those requests. I'm in very good hands. My only work is to relax and breathe, and I can do that easily. Everybody take a breath. Thank you all for another wonderful spiritual healthcare morning. Couldn't be doing this without you guys. Please send in some more topics. I love your topics. They are so good. And there's so much to cover. There's so much to cover in this craziness. And, you know, if you guys have, like, you know, questions about this stuff or whatever it is, you know, just, you know, text me, tweet me, message, you know, whatever format you pick. I will eventually get to it. I've got like a bit of a backlog right now, but just, you know, please send them, because it's always amazing to get your questions and on all of that. So thank you guys so much for all of this every morning. And I will see you guys back here tomorrow. Spiritual Healthcare, 10 a.m. Mountain Time. And I will talk to you guys very soon. See you all.